Now, if the fraction is a negative, okay, the equivalent fraction will also be negative. Okay, so if we're converting fractions and we're coming up with a different denominator, if we start with a negative fraction, we're still going to have a negative fraction. Now let's remember that negative numbers get larger, so to speak, and I'm going to put that into quotation marks there, as the number gets smaller. Okay, so as we get, so the bigger the number, actually the smaller it is, and that's kind of the same way with negatives just in general. So let's determine which fraction is larger. So we have negative 1/2 and negative 1/3. Well, negative 1/2 and negative 1/3, if we put that in there, they have different denominators, but we can multiply this by 3 and multiply this one by 2, kind of like we did in the previous example there. And this becomes negative 3/6, and this is negative 2/6. Now, remember, when we have like denominators, we can do this. Okay, as the number gets closer to 0, okay, it's actually becoming bigger when they're negatives. So 1/2 is actually smaller than negative 2/3. So negative 3/6 is actually smaller than negative 2/6. So we would put the less than sign in there. 1/2 is actually less than 1/3. Now if we see this one right here, okay, this one kind of is hopefully maybe a little bit helpful. We have negative 4/5 and positive 1/9. Well, that's pretty easy to just throw it in there because we know that a positive is always bigger than a negative. Always. We don't even have to do any other work with that there. Okay, so that will automatically kind of give us the answer. Now with this one here, we have negative 6/5 and negative 3/4. You might be able to see as well. We can do the work, and I'll show you a little trick later on. So negative 6/5 and negative 3/4. We need to multiply this one by 4, and we need to multiply this one by 5. Okay, so this will give us negative 24/20, and this will be negative 15/20. 15 is smaller than negative 24, so in fact, because they're negatives, it is bigger. Okay, so we'd put the less than symbol in there. Now you might notice here, this is kind of bigger than 1, right? It's improper fraction, and this is just a regular fraction, so the regular fraction would always be bigger based on kind of how we're organizing them. Now, to order a list of fractions, we want to change each denominator to a common number. Okay, and for this class here, I'm going to be asking that you always just change all of them into, or keep them as fractions, and make sure that they're all equivalent, because you want to keep them as fractions. For the most part, I've given fairly straightforward ones. You shouldn't have to do too much work with changing them. So here we have 1/2, 3/4, 1/3, and 1/4. Now, to create so what we want you to do is come up with a common denominator and then figure out which is smallest to biggest. Ascending always means this is always smallest to biggest. Okay, so we want to try to figure out which one's the smallest, which one's the biggest. Now some you might be able to already figure out, others might be a little bit tougher to determine. Common denominator between these 4 here, okay, we could multiply them by, we could kind of multiply all the numbers together, like 2 times 3 times 4, and we would get, 2 times 4 times 3, we'd get 24, so we just make them 24, or we can see that all 3 of these go into 12. So I'm going to multiply this one by 6, multiply this one by 3, multiply this one by 4, and multiply this one by 3 again. Okay, to make them, so the denominator will always be 12. This one becomes 6/12. This one becomes 9/12. This is 4/12. And this is 3/12. So now if we're going to write them out in ascending order, we got to look at the smallest. The smallest is, in fact, 1/4. Then, so that one's done. The next is here, which is 1/3. That one's done. Then here, which is 1/2. And then this one, which is 3/4. Now again, I'd like you to write them out in the same way that they started. Okay, even if we've done the changes, I want you to write them out in the way that it came. So that would be in simplest terms. Always in simplest terms. Let's do another little example here. We have 1/5, 2/3, 1/2, and 3/5. Okay. Now this one here, 3 and 5 go into 15, but 2 doesn't. So if we multiply 15 by 2, we get 30. And so in fact, that's what this is going to be. So 1 over 5, 2/3, 1/2, 3/5. We're going to multiply this by 6 because we want to get it into 30. Multiply this by 10. Multiply this one by 15. And I realize that these are pretty big numbers here. And multiply this again by 6. So this is 6 over 30. This is 20 over 30. But it's not overly big here. We can manage these ones. And this one will be 18 over 30. All right. Now, which one is the biggest? Well, or sorry, smallest? Well, this one right here is 1/5. So 1/5 is in fact the smallest. Starts there as well. So that one's done. Next would be 15, so that's 1/2. So that one's done. Next one would be this one, 3 over 5. That one's done. And then 20 over 30, which is 2/3. And that one's done. And that would be ordering them from least to greatest. Okay, ordering from least to greatest. Number 3 here, okay, we have 3, 3, 4, and 2. Similar numbers up here, so this means that we're going to have to come up with 12s. Okay, so we have 2 over 3, 4 over 3, 5 over 4. Oh, we got an couple improper fractions in here, which is okay. Okay, but we want to try to make them all to be 12. So we got to multiply this by 4, multiply this by 4, multiply this by 3, and multiply this by 6. Okay, so this is how we're going to, again, we need to multiply them each by some number so we create a common denominator. And again, common denominator might be kind of a challenge to find at times, but other times we might be able to find it really simply. This is 8 over 12. This one is 16 over 12. This one is 15 over 12. And this is 18 over 12. Okay. All right, which is the smallest? Okay, should be fairly straightforward. 8 is the smallest out of these. So 2/3 is the smallest. It's also not an improper fraction, so we know it's the smallest. Okay, so that one's done. The next smallest is the 15, so that would be 5 over 4 would come next. Then the 16, so that's 4 over 3. And then finally, 3 over 2 is right there at the end. So that would be from smallest to biggest. Based on what we have here, we need to put it back into our the originals. We don't want to have it in something different than originals, so we make sure to put it back. All right, negatives, a little bit more difficult here. -1/4, -2 over 3, -1 over 6, and -1/2. Okay, remember the only difference with negatives is that they go in the opposite order, so we have to mix around the orders. 4, 3, 6, and 2. Every one of those can be made into 12. If we multiply this by 3, multiply this by 4, multiply this by 2, multiply this by 6. Okay, it's in fact fairly straightforward that way. Okay, they can be able to be into 12 instead of into something a bit bigger. This is -3 over 12. This is going to be -8 over 12. This is going to be -2 over 12. And this is going to be -6 over 12. All right, now ascending means we're going from the biggest number, because they're all negatives, so the biggest number, because they're all negatives, to the smallest number, as it is negatives. Okay, and that's the only thing that is a little bit tricky and something that we have to watch for. All right, so, what we're going to do here is look for the biggest, so that is right over here, -8 over 12. So -2/3 would be first, and then is the 6, so it's -1/2, and then is the 3, so that's -1/4, and finally this one, -1 over 6. That is from smallest to biggest. Okay, when you write it out like that. All right, I want you to organize a bunch of numbers in order. Okay, questions 2 to 6 in your assignment. Okay, and I believe the last question, or the last 2 questions, are contextual ones. So if you're seeing it with just kind of like a number, something like this here, 2/3 like that, that can be written as 2 over 3. It's still a fraction. We can kind of think of, I think we're using test scores for some of them, as well as just how many are in there, just simple ratios. So questions 2 to 6, and you can complete those for next class.